Even before Article 50, which would signal the start of the Brexit negotiations, is triggered, we can already see a trade war developing with the EU. A few EU states, including France and Ireland, have started to offer sweetheart deals to British banks, which may see some of London's biggest banking headquarters move to Europe. The French have already reported having talks with some banking institutions. We should not expect any loyalty from these bankers, who were bailed out after they crashed the economy and caused suffering to millions of people, including those in the UK. We also have a report written by the Conservative MP for Brighton advocating ports that would be free from customs checks and duty charges. This would be allowed as long as the UK was not in the European Customs Union, which, as recent rhetoric from the Prime Minister would suggest, that a straight separation from Europe and all of its treaties is more likely, looks like it could be a possibility. So a trade war has already begun, even before the negotiations for Britain's exit from the EU have started. In many people's hopes, the EU was created to end war on the continent, where millions of people had died. One of the ways the EU started to bring countries closer together was to create stronger economic ties between the nations of Europe, because competing trade and economic interests had been major factors in conflicts of the past. Now, as the UK starts to leave the EU, trade wars will start and have started again. This will only be a race to the bottom, and Britain will lose the fight against one of the strongest trading blocs in the world. Britain will start to bring down corporation tax, as we have already seen, to absurd levels where companies will contribute basically nothing to the economy, if we exit under a Tory government, that is. Workers' rights and trade unions will be attacked continuously, and the politicians will tell us we have to work longer hours for lower pay to stay competitive. Therefore, the tax income of the government will mean they impose more austerity on working people, while the Tory donors, bosses and major shareholders make mega bucks in profit. Immigration rules will allow the rich to come here and push up house prices even further out of reach of new home buyers. Ideas like the free ports and low tax for the wealthy will make Britain a tax haven and money laundering centre, becoming one of the problems with globalisation instead of one of the solutions, which it could have been if it had stayed and continued to try and reform the EU. We will be taking tax money from other governments to enrich the wealthy Tory donors, while working people will be forced to accept a lower quality of life. Let's hope that after the negotiations on Article 50 are over, we can have a proper debate in Parliament that will stop any Tory jihad on working people. And to those who say the European Union will give the UK good terms, I believe are being far too optimistic. The EU has shown that it's quite happy to make an example of a country, as we have seen with Greece, which has been made to cripple its own economy, even though this is not good for the EU as a whole. The Greeks are being made an example of. The EU is also under threat from parties who oppose it in most of its member states, with elections coming up in France and Germany. They are going to want to make an example of the UK to try and hold the Union together. If this comes to pass, Scotland would, I imagine, hold another referendum and vote out, encouraged by the EU, who would probably give them good terms on joining the European club. However, Scotland would have to be wary of the Eurozone, which is still in crisis, and going to their own currency could take 10 years. We will have to see what happens in Northern Ireland after the collapse of the government there. However, the rise in those younger generation of Northern Irish who voted to stay in, and if Sinn Féin win the election, could see a united Ireland of Ireland after Brexit. Britain will probably have to get closer to the Americans, becoming even more subservient to them, and as the Tories will be desperate for a free trade deal, will probably become something akin to the 51st state of the USA, perhaps even under a Trump-Farage alliance. We will have to see through the propaganda put out by all the media and politicians. For example, Liam Fox MP recently lied by telling a meeting that Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, could break European banking laws if she propped up Deutsche Bank. This is absolutely false. EU nations can bail out their banks, and rules governing the euro currency have many problems. But this ain't one, Mr. Fox. But Tories are so used to sneering and blaming the EU for random stuff that's untrue, he probably didn't even realise he was lying. From this point on, every person in the UK will need to pay attention to what's going on and keep up the pressure on politicians to make sure Brexit is as fair as it can be to normal people and not an opportunity for the Tories to sell the country off to big business and their donors in the 1%.